how fast he can talk about Kotlin.
Okay, so thank you. I'm glad that you came to my talk, Kotlin for Android, because we have to be on time with closing ceremony, so I have to talk a little bit faster. So my name is Václav Souhrada, and I am working as Android developer at Eman. Before I will start, only some short quiz. How many people here are already familiar with Kotlin? Good to see. Okay, so I will not go deeply to the Kotlin. I will focus for Android. So what is Kotlin? Kotlin is statically typed programming language targeting to the JVM, so to the Android and JavaScript. You also, I think that you notice that we have currently version 1.2 as a release candidate, and with this version we have here support for writing multi-platform applications. So maybe you know that this week was a Kotlin conference in San Francisco, and the whole application was written for iOS and Android in Kotlin. So if you are interested, you can check JetBrains GitHub where this application is, and you can see how it's done by multi-platform. Whole project Kotlin started in 2010, and it's developed by the JetBrains company. And one of the main big point of the Kotlin is that Kotlin is 100% interoperable with the Java. So what it means for us as an Android developer is that we can use still libraries which are written in the Java. And when you are thinking about Kotlin or you want to start with Kotlin in your project, so you don't need to rewrite whole your application from beginning, but for instance you can continue on your project, and for instance new features you will write in the Kotlin, old code can stay in the Java, and it's also up to you if for instance would like to convert old code. For instance, if you will fix some bug in the Java, so you can convert it easily in Android Studio, this whole code to the Kotlin, or you can let it in Java. One of next features in Kotlin is that Kotlin is the type safe and null safety language. So if you want to allow setup null value to the variable, you must say it explicitly. Then next big feature is that Kotlin contains data classes. So you know from the Java, when you are creating POJO object, you have to define variables, setters, getters. You have to write a hash code method, toString, and so on. In Kotlin you can do it by creating a special class which you will define as the data class. And another things are extension functions, and about extension functions I will be talking later. So for us as Android developers, I think one of the biggest announcements this year was announcement on the Google I/O that Kotlin is now first class supported language for the Kotlin, for the Android. What it means for us when we are using, for instance, Kotlin. By using a Kotlin we can reduce amount of boilerplate code, what you need to write, and we can make our code more readable and understandable. And if we will use Kotlin correctly, so we can avoid our favorite exception, null pointer exception, and in your activities or fragments you don't need to use anymore find view by ID method. Another thing is that you can have one language for your whole application. For instance, you can have your Android application in the Kotlin code, and also a Gradle file you can write in Kotlin, because Gradle is also supporting Kotlin, so you can switch from Groovy to the Kotlin to in Gradle. About interop I already talked, and Kotlin is a new language, and learning new language is fun, and Kotlin is fun. So here is, for instance, some simple example of extension functions on the Kotlin. Imagine that you have a view, for instance, and you want to extend already existing view object and put there some your function what you need to have, for instance, if or you wish in this view object. For instance, I have here, this is in the normal way in Kotlin how I can set up visibility for this view. And in the Kotlin, by using extension function, you can create the function and define it as an extension that you are extending a view object. And inside you can set now your visibility of this view. And this you can do same for instance, for the height. So for the view that you want to gun this view. And then in your code, you can just call function show, for instance. Next thing is that are Kotlin Android extensions. So as all Android developers, we know when we are, for instance, creating activity and we want to set up a content layout for our activity, we have to define this layout in the set content view, and then we can access all view components from this layout by calling find view by ID, and we will put their ID for which we are looking for. For instance, here I am looking for the button, and then I would like to, for instance, set the text to this button. Now you have possibility to set in your Gradle file and apply plugin Kotlin Android extension. With this, you don't need to call find view by ID anymore, and you just can use name of this ID which you define in the layout. It looks like some magic, so go to this magic and looks how it works. At the end, what you have to do in this case is that you will use synthetic import, so it will import all elements where you will define the ID from XML as a extension property. So you have a layout, for instance, and we have a text view. Here you will define ID input greetings, for instance, and by this ID you have now access as an extension property in your activity or fragment code. How it's done when you are looking where you will look to the bytecode, so you can see that it will generate a hash map, and every time when you are accessing this your button by using Kotlin Android extension, so it's looking to this hash map, so it has some view cache, and if there is no your ID, so it will call in the normal way find view by ID, and it will put to the cache. Next thing is Anko library. Anko library is developed by the JetBrains company. It contains a lot of extension functions and useful utilities classes which are and wrappers around Android API, and also it contains a nice feature that allows you create a UI dynamically. Instead of XML, you will define it in the code. Anko contains several parts like commands where you can find extension functions for working with intents, dialogues. Then layouts where you can create, as I mentioned, the dynamic layout, and SQLite where it contains a lot of DSL functions to make your life easier when you are working with SQLite, and newly coroutine support. So I would like to now show you how you can work with intent in Anko. In the normal way, when you want, for instance, switch from main activity to the login activity, you have to create an intent, put their context and class of your activity, and then you are calling start activity function and put their intent. With Anko, you have here extension function called intent4, where is as a generic type you will put your activity class, and then you can normally call start activity. And even more, you can use start activity extension function directly from the Anko library, and your code can look now in this style. If you will look to the intent for method inside of the Anko library, you can find that there is var_arg parameters, which are pair. So, for instance, if you want to put some argument or to intent parameters, so in the normal way, you are creating instance of intent and call their methods for instance, put extra. For instance, I would like to show registration from login activity. But with Anko, you can reuse intent for method and put their parameter because we have a pair there, so we can use function 2, and we can set up parameters inside of the intent for method. Another thing is that if you want to add some flags to intent, so there is how you can do it in the standard way. But with Anko, we have here all extension functions for these flags. So, for instance, you can call single top function. This is how it looks when you are looking to the Anko library. So it's a normal extension function which will apply to instance of intent and add flag here. Next thing on the Anko is that you can use Anko for running operations on the background thread. To version 0.9, you have there in this version of library, you have there DSL log do async, and everything what you will put inside of this block will be executed on the background thread. And then, for instance, if you are on activity, you can put inside of the activity UI thread function, you can put their code which will be executed back on the main thread. With newer version of Anko 0.10, there is a support for Kotlin coroutines. So you have a normal from coroutines block async, where you can put a parameter UI, which is defined inside of the Anko library. It's instance of the handler, and then you can define the block background, and everything what you will now put inside of this block will be executed on the background. Background block is returning deferred object, and then you can on this deferred use the function await, and this function is waiting for result of coroutine, and when it's done, so we can, for instance, in this way, in this example, show toast, or if it will not be successful, so we will show, for instance, alert dialog. Another thing on Anko is, as I mentioned, that contains a lot of extension functions, for instance, for working with toast. In the normal way, you have to each time call on the toast make text method and put their context, your message, define if it's the short or long, and next, as the last thing, is that you must call show function to display a toast. With inside of the Anko, we have extension functions for this. So if you want to show toast, you just will call toast function and put there only the message you want to show. If you want to display a long toast, so we have here for this extension function with name long toast. Next thing is that you can easily show alert dialog. So you only need to define parameters like a message and title, and then you can define a positive button like a yes button and negative button like a no button, and then define action what should be show, for instance, when you click on the button. And you should not forget to call function show. Next thing is part from the layout, that you can create with Anko your layout dynamically. So it means that you will not create it in XML, but directly in your code. For this, you have almost all of UI elements what you can find when you are creating layout inside of XML. For instance, vertical layout. This is normal linear layout with orientation vertical, And inside of this, you can add all widgets what you are usually using inside of XML. So for instance, define edit text, button with text, and you can say on what should happen on, for instance, on the click action. Now we have, for instance, this example that we want to add a username and password field with button sign in. So you can again create a vertical layout with edit text. In Anko, you have all parameters like in XML, so you can define ID, for instance, height resource, and at the end you can define parameters for your layout, so say width and height. If you will look, this username, we can do it same for the password, and then you can see on this that we have here text size, and both has size 24. Anko contains another function. It's apply recursively, so you can apply to whole layout recursively some variables which will be common for all these parts. So for instance, in our example, we will set to all edit text inside of vertical layout size 24. This was one example, but another way how to define UI dynamically by using Anko is that you will create your view inside of Anko components. So you can easily reuse your code because you can share this component with another views. And how you can do it? You normally create a new class which will extend Anko component, and as a generic type you will put the name of your activity. And then you will override on create view function, and inside of this on create view you will define your dynamic layout. So we have as a parameter is a reference to Anko context with your activity. You will add, for instance, edit text, and then in your activity you only need to create instance of your view and call their function setContentView. And that's all what you need to do when you are working with Anko component. There is the contact to me. If maybe not in Czech Republic, we have Czech Kotlin user group. So I will be happy if you will join. And thank you for your attention.